Hey everybody, True Diltom here. Today I wanted to make a quick video on something that I have talked about on my channel but haven't fleshed out too much, and that is on sexuality. My next video is taking some time to make, so I thought I would at least upload something in the meantime, and for those of you who follow me on Facebook, you will have already heard this because I posted on it recently, and for those who don't follow me on Facebook, the link is in the description. But nonetheless, let's talk about sexuality, or more specifically, the Evolian view of sexuality. But first things first, one of the reasons I'm so interested in this discourse is because the answers one gives to questions about sex are equally telling of questions about human nature, which is to say that this is where one must start their investigation into such an intimate subject. For instance, it is obvious that a transphysical and transcendental view of man will lead one to very different conclusions about sex than a naturalist view, and moreover, what is there that a Christian, a pagan, and an atheist could disagree on more than sex? Well, such a disagreement is only seconded again by the metaphysics of the human condition, so hence, it must be said that this particular doctrine of sex is intended for someone with an anthropology that grants man the dignity of being higher than the material world around him, and not simply the explanandum of that which is beneath him. It is intended for a specific type of person who may be content with the lower accounting for the higher, but whose intuitions lead him to wholeheartedly reject this when accounting for himself. All because this is intended for the man that has imposed law on himself from within himself. His flesh is restricted for his soul, and thus this is intended for the man that has achieved inner sovereignty. So nonetheless, I intend to lead as many away from a naturalistic view of human sexuality as possible. As has been said before, realism is worth no more in love than in art. On an erotic level, imitation of nature becomes imitation of the beast. In fact, the sexuality of animals, even when it manifests itself in men, marks the fall of an impulse that belongs to something much more existential than to the chaos of biology. Now, of course, this isn't to represent a Christian morality that places the reproductive processes as a part of the divine order. Instead, reproduction is only secondary. To borrow from Evola, quote, "When a man and woman copulate only to bring children into the world, they certainly do not have this idea in mind at the moment of their union," end quote. Which is to say, reproduction is never the conscious motive of the unstoppable impulse to copulate. Instead, it operates on a deeper level with a goal to unionize and to possess. So unlike the naturalists, it is essential that we see unionization as the ends of any mutual attraction between the sexes. It is this which is the center of gravity for all love. Furthermore, it is clear that the animal hierarchy illustrates a move away from multiplication and towards mutual attraction as we climb it upwards. At the bottom, species are asexual and have zero sexual impulse towards another of its own kind, while the higher the species in the animal hierarchy, the less the desire to multiply and the greater the force of attraction is, thus making for a more multi-dimensional and non-individual sexuality. But to continue, the greatest shame is a man that fails to extrapolate beyond the most immediate process of their consciousness, to have the circuit of their mind close so quickly that only a carnal lust remains, as these physiological conditional qualities are interchangeable with those of the animal kingdom, and hence are to forsake one's role as a man. Instead, sex is not reducible to the body, it is not reducible to the material world as the reductionists of our age would posit. Rather, sex exists just as much inwardly and spiritually as it does outwardly and physically, simply because we are first man and woman internally before we are so externally. And so, the primordial qualities of male and female manifest themselves with us and saturate us, in fact so much so as to characterize our very souls. Hence, mankind has thought to have been divided into male and female, and just as the ancient Greek myth of Hermaphrodites, the young boy that was turned into a hybrid of male and female by a nymph, sex is symbolic of the union between the sexes, between male and female. Now, surprising to some, Myth is the means by which the traditional world expressed the ultimate significance of being, and thus, stories served since their beginning long ago as a means of guiding man through the stages of life. To point to post-trauma specialist and psychoanalyst Joseph Campbell, the soul needs stories and the rituals and traditions they are encapsulated within. After all, language itself is one of symbols and themes, of which carry the most inner and sacred knowledge of the human condition. It is here where our mystical understandings are most greatly expressed and carried down through the generations. And so it is stories, ritual, and myth that guides man through the cold, cruel, and deceptive times in one's life, as well as the redemptive, desirous, and tenacious times as well. It is myth that serves to symbolize the stages of childhood, becoming a man, and death, in order to relinquish the chaos of freedom and bring about order and purpose. To borrow from Campbell again, it is with this guidance a person would soon be far better able to name, in oneself and others, those critical and resonant elements and facts that compose a human being. So subsequently, for our investigation, we will reinstate myth as a resource in order to explore the metaphysics of sex. In the modern world, the intellectual project of reductionism is really the undoing of an ancient systematization of solidarity over the abortive gesture, something that I have spoken about in my videos on language and generative anthropology, a revolt against the notion that the ancient instruments of self-understanding capture more of man's essence than the institutional sciences. So thus, without referring back to generative anthropology in this video, conflict will inevitably follow from the absence of myth, rituals, traditions, and stories, both as a system of deferral and as a means of self-understanding. Now, to refer to the myth most familiar to the West, the ancient Greeks and the myth of the hermaphrodite, particularly via the discussion of love in Plato's Symposium, as the text explores two theories of love that share the knowledge embodied in the myth. Furthermore, these theories being those of Aristophanes and Diotima, as the two theories are complementary and illustrate the contradictions and problems of Eros, the Greek god of sexual attraction. So, firstly, according to Plato, a primordial race existed whose essence is now extinct. A race that was not divided like man was into both male and female, instead both parts were united within them as one being, and this hermaphroditic race was extraordinarily strong and brave, and they nourished in their hearts very arrogant designs, even onto an attack upon the gods themselves. The traditions recounted by Homer regarding Otho and Ephialtes and their attempt to scale the sky so as to assault the gods is also attributed to this race. Now, this concept repeats itself in many other myths, such as the hubris of the Titans and Giants, and in the myth of Prometheus, and even in the biblical myth of Adam and the Garden of Eden, that being the promise that ye shall be gods, and then a fall from an absolute state to the imperfect and broken state we see today. But moreover, Plato claimed that the gods had paralyzed the power of this primordial and hermaphroditic race and had broken them into two, arising a new being that belonged to either one sex or another, each belonging to man or woman without having both principles within them. However, their knowledge and memory of the past state remained, and thus the impulse to return to this state of unity was kindled. According to Plato, it is this that Eros finds his transcendence in and is granted his everlasting meaning. As Plato wrote, quote, "From such an ancient time as love goaded human beings one towards the other, it is inborn and seeks to renew our ancient nature in an endeavor to unite in one single being two distinct beings, and therefore to restore human nature to good health," end quote. But in Symposium, Plato makes Hephaestus ask the lovers, quote, "Is it not perhaps this for which you long, a perfect mutual fusion, so that you will never be sundered from each other by day or night? If this is what you wish, I am ready to melt you and weld you together with fire into one and the same individual so as to reduce you to one single being instead of the two which you were beforehand. In this way, you may live united to each other for the whole of your lives, and when you are dead and down in Hades, you may be only one instead of two and may share together one single fate. Well then, ask yourself if this is what you want and whether you think you can be happy if you obtain it. We know very well, said Plato, that no one would refuse such a proposal or show himself desirous of something else, but each person, without any hesitation, would deem that he had finally heard expressed that which had certainly been his desire for a long time, namely to be united and fused with his beloved, so as to form one single nature from two distinct beings. Now, the cause of this desire is to be sought in the fact that this was indeed our primitive nature when we constituted one unit which was still whole. It is really the burning longing for this unity which bears the name of love." End quote. But from this, the myth of Plato depicts the change from unity to duality, and just as the Garden of Eden myth does, Plato also illustrates the transition away from absolute being to a world of duality. But its most significant and intimate knowledge is held within the object of eros, the application of both principles, male and female, which is to say, it isn't because of a woman's nature that she is desired by a man. Instead, she is an instrument to overcome the fall, to leave the world of a broken dual existentiality and to become absolute. This is the mystic understanding embodied within the male impulse towards woman in its most elementary form, as whatever way human love manifests itself, never does it manifest itself in absolute men or absolute women, but merely beings that are byproducts of one or the other. But anyway guys, that's going to have to do it for this one. All my social media links are in the description, and as usual, have a good one.